In 2023, a viral event achieved something that 17 years of quiet investigation could not. It ripped open the deepest contradiction in the McCann family's public facade. When Julia Wendell emerged, claiming to be Madeleine, the reaction from the parents who had spent millions on their search was not an outpouring of hopeful relief, but a paralyzing, almost deafening panic. This silence shrieked louder than any press release ever could. That reaction wasn't truly about a confused young woman in Poland. It was about a trigger, a powerful detonation that reignited the original fear from that night in 2007. Because their panic reveals a cold, uncomfortable truth. Their greatest fear wasn't that Julia was fabricating her claim, but that the viral attention she generated might accidentally stumble upon the real story, the truth about what truly unfolded in apartment 5A. Julia's claim in the end wasn't a distraction. It was the key. The key that allows us to decode the McCanns' behavior and understand why, for them, the possibility of finding Madeleine alive became the greatest threat of all. And the reason for that doesn't lie in Poland, but in the family secret they have been meticulously protecting for nearly 2 decades. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please let me know where you saw this video. I will read it all and spread it around the world. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel to be the first to receive notifications when there are new videos. To understand the sudden, visible panic of 2023, we must revisit the emotional epicenter of the trauma. Apartment 5A, on the night of May 3, 2007. The official narrative is one we all know well. Kate and Gerry McCann dined with friends 50 meters away while their 3 young children slept in an unlocked holiday apartment. Around 10 p.m., Kate went to check on the children and discovered Madeleine's bed empty and a window ajar. Her scream, "They've taken her," launched the largest missing person inquiry in modern history. But beneath this accepted version, a second narrative, an undercurrent of unsettling inconsistencies, begins to flow that very night. The first and most glaring is the parents' immediate demeanor. Reports from resort staff and the Tapas 7, the McCanns' friends, describe a couple who were strangely contained, almost numb, where a frantic, desperate search of the surroundings would be expected. Witnesses describe a disturbing calm. Instead of running along the beach and shouting his daughter's name, Gerry McCann focused on calling the British media. Kate, according to reports, swung between bursts of tears and an unsettling composure, even refusing to answer direct questions from the very first police officers to arrive. This behavior isn't the classic profile of distraught parents whose child has been snatched. It's the shock of someone who has suddenly lost control of a situation. Trauma theory teaches us about the fight, flight, or freeze response. The McCanns' reaction that night wasn't a fight, wasn't a desperate search, it was a paralysis, a freeze that arises when the threat is not just external, but internal. The core conflict in the McCann case was never simply parents versus an unknown person who may have caused harm. It has always been the parents' narrative versus the accumulating evidence, and contradictory signs began piling up from the first minute. The bedroom window supposedly used by the person who took the child was intact, with no signs of forced entry, and could only be fully opened from the inside. The testimony of Jane Tanner, one of the friends who claimed to have seen a man carrying a child, was inconsistent and only became cemented after hypnosis sessions. The apartment itself was compromised. Friends and staff moved in and out, polluting a scene that, perhaps conveniently, could never be properly analyzed. The inciting event wasn't Madeleine's disappearance. It was the creation of a story to cover up what truly occurred. The conflict isn't the search for a child, but the desperate, unwavering maintenance of a statement that began to unravel the moment it was uttered. The family secret wasn't born when Madeleine vanished. It was born when her parents decided how they would tell the world she was gone. In the months that followed, the McCanns' PR machine, funded by millions in donations, went into full operation. They became untouchable. Any journalist who dared to question the official version was immediately subject to legal action. Any police officer who edged too close to an uncomfortable line was systematically discredited. The Portuguese detective, Gonçalo Amaral, who led the initial investigation and dared to name the parents as formal suspects, was removed from the case and saw his career effectively destroyed after publishing a book detailing his theory. The message was unmistakable. Do not cross this line. But the truth, like water, always finds a crack to seep through. And the biggest crack in the McCanns' fortress came in the form of two specialist British dogs, Eddie and Keeler, trained to detect the scent associated with human remains and human fluid. Brought to Portugal months after the event, these dogs, with an accuracy rate exceeding 95%, delivered the most chilling finding of the entire investigation. Inside apartment 5A, Eddie, the specialist search dog, gave a powerful alert at a specific spot behind the living room sofa. Then, in the parents' bedroom, Keeler, the fluid detection dog, confirmed the alerts. But the true turning point came in the resort's parking lot. The dogs were presented with dozens of cars, including the Renault Scenic the McCanns had rented 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. As they approached the family car, the dog's behavior changed drastically. Eddie alerted incessantly at the driver's door and the trunk. Keeler gave similar alerts, indicating the presence of human fluid residue. Experts say the scent associated with human remains can transfer through clothing or hair to a new environment, even weeks later. The implication was clear and deeply concerning. Something or someone carrying the scent of a profound biological event had been in that car. The McCanns' reaction to this scientific evidence was immediately revealing. They didn't offer to help. They attacked. They discredited the dogs, questioned the science, and publicly accused the Portuguese police of misconduct. It was the first time their panic became overtly visible to the world. It wasn't the fear of an external threat. It was the fear of a science they couldn't control, a truth they couldn't litigate away. The dogs had no agenda. They couldn't be intimidated. They simply reacted to a biological fact. And the fact they pointed to was that a serious biological event had been present in that apartment. The dog's evidence led the Portuguese police to do the unthinkable. On September 7, 2007, Kate and Gerry McCann were officially named arguidos, or formal suspects, in their daughter's disappearance. This was the point of no return. The victim parents' mask had cracked publicly, and the narrative they controlled with an iron grip was collapsing. Kate McCann's interrogation that day is a critical study in the psychology of strategic defense. For 11 hours, she refused to answer 48 direct questions based on the new evidence. Questions like, why didn't you search for your daughter that night? Why were scents associated with a significant biological event found on your clothes and in the car you rented weeks later? What happened in apartment 5A? For all of them, the response was the same. I'm not going to answer. This isn't the silence of an innocent person who has been wrongly accused. It's the strategic silence of someone who knows any response, any attempt at explanation, would only create more contradictions. It's what interrogation experts call passive defense. When you have no plausible explanation for the evidence, the only safe move is to say nothing. Silence becomes a shield. The designation as arguidos and the subsequent silence during the interrogation solidified the family's secret. From that moment on, the war was no longer about finding Madeleine, but about clearing their own names. They swiftly departed Portugal days later, returning to the UK where their PR machine could operate at full force, effectively portraying them as victims of an incompetent foreign police force. They decisively won that war in the media. The arguido status was lifted a year later due to insufficient conclusive evidence. The world, little by little, accepted the story of the persecuted couple. The secret seemed safe again, buried under layers of lawsuits, favorable news articles, and the passage of time. They built a fortress of silence and power around themselves. A fortress that seemed impenetrable for 16 years, until, in 2023, a Polish girl with a phone in her hand unknowingly discovered the only weapon capable of shaking that fortress. She didn't use forensic evidence or witnesses. She used Madeleine's own image against them, and in doing so, she forced them to relive the original panic of 2007, the panic of being confronted with a truth they couldn't control. If Julia's claim, even as a fabrication, could generate this level of visible panic, what would happen if one day the real Madeleine showed up at their door? The Julia Wendell phenomenon wasn't a frontal assault on the McCanns' fortress. It was a flank attack, one they never anticipated. She didn't come with lawyers or forensic evidence. She came with the most powerful weapon of the digital age, a meme. Her image side by side with Madeleine's, the coloboma in the eye, the subtle similarity in the smile. The internet did the rest. In days, millions of people weren't just commenting, they were believing, and that's when the paralysis set in. The McCanns' PR team, so efficient at destroying detectives' careers and suing newspapers, was trapped. Their strategy had always been to control the narrative. But how do you control a viral fire spreading across millions of phones? Suing Julia, a clearly vulnerable young woman, would be a PR disaster. Ignoring her was impossible, as the slogan, "I think I'm Madeleine McCann," dominated social media. For the first time in 16 years, they lost total control of Madeleine's image. Their daughter, who had become a sacred, untouchable symbol of their campaign, was being kidnapped again, this time by an algorithm. The climax of this story wasn't the result of Julia's DNA test. The climax was the McCanns' reaction before the result. The refusal to immediately offer a DNA test. The cold statement from a spokesperson saying there was nothing to comment on. For parents who supposedly spent nearly 2 decades searching to find their daughter, the appearance of someone who could be her, no matter how unlikely, should have triggered an immediate, verifiable response. It was the only logical response for grieving parents. But are they simply grieving parents, or are they first and foremost the unwavering guardians of a secret? And Julia's fabrication threatened that secret in a new and terrifying way. The renewed global spotlight wasn't focused on a potential external threat, but squarely on Madeleine's identity. What if this new surge of attention, even if born from a lie, led to new scrutiny? What if someone decided to re-examine the compelling evidence from the specialist dogs? What if a journalist decided to investigate what really happened inside apartment 5A? The McCanns' panic in 2023 wasn't fear of an imposter. It was the return of the repressed. It was the visceral fear of 2007. The terror of exposure flooding back. Julia's claim was the mirror they were forcibly held up to, and the reflection wasn't of a Polish girl, but of their own profound anxiety and the narrative they have fiercely protected for 17 years. The mask of the grieving parents slipped, not because Julia tore it off, but because their own panic made it slide, and for a revealing moment, the world didn't see victims. It saw suspects. The DNA test confirmed Julia wasn't Madeleine. The media circus quickly moved on. For most, the case was closed, a bizarre and forgettable interlude. But for those paying careful attention, the critical damage was done. Julia's fabrication, in fading away, left behind something indelible. The raw, undeniable image of the McCanns' panic. Isn't it strange how a lie can sometimes become the ultimate vehicle for a deeper truth? I remember following the Julia case in real time, and what struck me wasn't her claims, but the collective, intuitive sentiment that emerged in the comments and forums. A silent, universal question. Everyone seemed to be asking, if they were my parents, wouldn't they rush to take the test immediately just to be sure? And that simple question, that profound break in expectation, was more powerful than any piece of evidence. It connected us, the spectators, to the fundamental dissonance of the case. We felt in our gut that their reaction was fundamentally wrong. This feeling has a name. In psychology, it's explained by complex trauma theory, which suggests that families harboring dark core secrets, a hidden event, a cover-up, don't simply live in the past. They live in a perpetual present where the original trauma is always lurking just beneath the surface. Every knock on the door, every unexpected phone call could be the moment the entire structure collapses. Julia Wendell was a knock on the door, a very loud and insistent knock. Their reaction wasn't to her personally. It was to the constant fear that defines their daily lives. They aren't just hiding an event from the past. They are actively managing an ongoing trauma, day by day. The deepest consequence of Julia's fabrication was the humanization of the secret. Before Julia, the family secret was a theory, an abstraction. After Julia, it became a visible, real-time emotion. We saw the panic. We saw raw fear stripped of the PR armor. The fabrication acted like a chemical reagent spilled onto a perfectly composed family photograph. The image instantly began to corrode at the edges, revealing the darkness beneath. They may have won the legal battle against Detective Gonzalo Amaral. They may have effectively silenced the critical British media. But they couldn't control a young woman with a phone and a story. And in desperately trying to protect themselves from her, they ended up exposing themselves in a way no formal investigation ever could. They showed us that the fortress they built around themselves wasn't constructed to keep abductors out. It was built to keep the truth locked in. The fabrication is gone, but the crack in the fortress wall remains visible, and now the only question that matters is what else could slip through that crack. The story that began with a simple question, why did the McCanns panic over Julia Wendell's fabrication, now reaches its close. The resolution isn't in the DNA result, but in the understanding that their panic was never about Julia. It was about what she represented: chaos, loss of control. And for a family whose only survival mechanism for 17 years has been absolute control of the narrative, loss of control is a fundamental psychological collapse. The character arc here is a tragedy. Kate and Gerry McCann aren't cinematic villains. They are profoundly tragic figures, trapped in a web they wove themselves. Their prolonged journey wasn't a search for their daughter, but a perpetual flight from the truth. Every lawsuit, every controlled interview, every attack on those who dared to doubt wasn't an act of strength, but of desperation. They weren't building a legacy. They were reinforcing the bars of a psychological prison. Julia's fabrication didn't tear down the prison, but it brilliantly illuminated the bars, showing the world that they are and always have been on the inside. The family secret, the emotional burden locked in the basement, wasn't destroyed, but now we have all heard it stir. The McCanns' panic was the echoing sound of that secret moving in the darkness. The resolution for us as observers is clarity. Julia's fabrication, which seemed like a senseless distraction, became the final crucial piece of the psychological puzzle. It gave us implicit permission to trust what our instincts already told us. Their reaction was never truly that of innocent parents. The central conflict, the parents' narrative versus the unsettling evidence, resolves not with a formal confession, but with an involuntary emotional exposure. They didn't tell us the truth, but they showed us the depth of their fear of it. And in that fear, we found the most honest answer they've ever given. The locked door of apartment 5A remained sealed, but the panic Julia's fabrication caused opened a small fissure. And through that fissure, for the first time, we didn't see the image of an external threat, but the chilling reflection of the fear of the door's guardians. In the end, this entire story isn't just about an unsolved crime. It's about the staggering weight of a secret. The playwright Eugene O'Neill, a master at dissecting family secrets, wrote that there is no present or future, only the past happening over and over again. The McCanns' panic in 2023 wasn't a new event. It was the terror of 2007 happening again, for the whole world to witness. And that makes me think about the impact these choices have on a human scale. Their family secret isn't just a thought, it becomes a living entity. It dictates who can enter your home, what topics can be discussed at the dinner table, what questions can never be asked. It feeds on silence and grows in the darkness, poisoning everything around it. The McCanns tragedy teaches us that trying to protect a lie ultimately costs far more than facing the truth, no matter how difficult it is. The great lesson here is about the walls we build. The McCann family constructed perhaps the greatest PR wall in history, not to protect themselves from external danger, but to imprison themselves with their own secret, eliminating any chance of real peace. The question that lingers, echoing long after the media noise fades, is one we can all ask ourselves. What are the great psychological walls you're building in your life? And who are they really keeping from moving forward? In the end, my objective statement on all this is that truth has a weight, and when you refuse to carry it, it doesn't disappear. It simply seeps into the ground beneath your feet, rotting the foundation of everything you build on top. The McCanns aren't just fleeing from an event in 2007, they're fleeing from the inevitable collapse of a structure built on rotten ground. Julia Wendell's fabrication was the tremor that reminded us that this foundation is and always has been destined to give way. And now, after all this, I really want to know what this story stirred in you. Do you feel the McCanns' panic was an involuntary confession of guilt, or simply the understandable reaction of exhausted, wrongfully accused parents fighting for their lives? Write it in the comments. It can be just a line, but let it come from the heart. What action, if any, do you feel compelled to take now that you've processed this incredible psychological dissonance? Thanks for watching. How do you feel about these arguments and theories? Does it give you a different perspective on the case? Leave your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive the latest notifications.